You might want to turn off your cell phones, and then Eric will sign afterwards. We will set up a table up front for you that makes it easy, or if you want to just sit here. Sometimes it's nice to have
I'm going to walk around the store if you can catch me.
And we do have a book for sale at the front counter there, so you know afterwards. Really happy to have Eric. I'm going to try to do this right. Piotrowski.
Perfect.
That's good for me. To read from his new collection of short stories. And he says you can be guaranteed there are not going to be any vampires or zombies. But I guess there will be chewing tobacco and garbage and many other topics in the story. So we're really happy to have him here. And here it is.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you so much to Room of One's Own for hosting me. I think it's a little rude for them to put me here in this area of the store with all these books that are about actually important things. Wall Street Collapse, Barbara Ehrenreich. And then I have this bunch of silly little things about people playing video games. I also want to thank my awesome wife Diane, who is here. She did some amazing copy editing and feedback on a lot of the different stories in here. Thanks to Room of One's Own, as I said. I also want to give a quick thanks before we start to De La Soul's new album, First Serve. I don't know if anybody here listens to De La Soul, but they have an album that came out very recently called First Serve, and it's a concept album which has a bunch of little skits and then a bunch of great music, which tells the story of these two up-and-coming rappers as they try to make it in the game. And that album became sort of the soundtrack for this project during the summer, because it starts out when they're in their basement and they're just sort of doing things on a little, 8-track whatever, and then they're putting in the work, and there's a track about the disappointment, the heartbreak, and the struggle and the difficulty. And so it just seemed to really go along well with the process of trying to get this done and get it out there and try to get people interested in it. I will also thank 77 Square and the Isthmus publications here in Madison who have helped to promote this event. And I definitely want to give a big thanks to my students. Thank you very much, Megan, for coming. Hopefully some others will be on their way. We've had some people on Facebook RSVP, and I can't imagine that anybody would RSVP to a public event on Facebook and then not actually come. Right. Seems beyond the pale. I must say it's a very odd experience for me to be talking in front of a group of people who generally laugh when I say things, because a lot of times in the classroom that doesn't happen. And speaking of which, I will also give a big thanks to the Sun Prairie High School English teachers, present and past, for providing me a lot of excellent support and feedback. And Chris also for the ride today. The car's been in the shop for 3 days, and so I had to bug Chris for a ride here. So the title of the book is called This Ain't What You Run For, and that comes from this book, Nelson Algren's Nonconformity. This is the best book I've ever read about writing. He has a lot of interesting things to say, most of which are acerbic and scornful of other writers. And one of my favorite quotes from the book was made into a bookmark by a teacher friend of mine, Creed Hansen. And he said, the quote from the book here is, "A certain ruthlessness and a sense of alienation from society is as essential to creative writing as it is to armed robbery." And I think that's true. I actually believe that in order to write something worthwhile, you have to write something that is potent. And he says you have to want revenge in some way. And in a way, I think that's true. Now, you can't let this writing only be about potency of revenge. You have to also be trying to say something about the human condition and what helps us to sustain ourselves. And more than anything, what I realized is that these stories, I think, aren't really tragedies. I'm not trying to tell tragic stories, although there are tragic things that happen to the characters in here. I want to tell stories, and I think that the world needs more stories that have to do with how we hang on and how we overcome the difficulties that beset us. Helen Keller said the world is full of suffering, yes, but it's full also of the overcoming of it. And I think that's something that gets lost, especially when serious writers want to tell stories that are painful and so edgy and real. And often that means we leave sight of the compassion and the nurturing and all the rest of it. Anyway, so the title of the book comes from a quote from this book, Nonconformity. Hello, welcome, come on in, there's plenty of seats. Nelson Algren says in this book, he's from Chicago by the way, really good writer. He wrote The Man with the Golden Arm, which was made into the Frank Sinatra movie. The book's very different, the book is very interesting. It's about a guy who's addicted to heroin. Anyway, a lot of his stories were about people who were on the underside of society. And that's one of the things he wants to say, is that he says it's the writer's job to not serve the people in positions of high power, but to tell the stories that aren't told in the the megaphones of the wealthy and powerful. Anyway, he says in this book, no book was ever worth the writing that wasn't done with the attitude that this ain't what you rung for, Jack, but it's what you're damned well getting. And I really like that quote, so I thought, hey, yeah, this collection of stories. I've been a writer all my life. I've written 4 novels, but none of them are in a position to be published right now. They need a lot of work. The first ones I started writing when I was 12 years old, and the first 3 are a fantasy trilogy about these people who go from Earth to this fantasy world, and it's a fairly standard, conventional adventure story, but then other things happen, and then the second and third book become sort of science fiction, what happens when we die, all this other stuff. And anyway, they're horrible, because I started writing when I was 12, right? I mean, imagine what. So they need some work, and in the meantime, since I don't want to work on those right now, I started working on another book that isn't really for kids, so I'm going to have to publish it under a pseudonym. But then I realized over the beginning of the summer, I realized that I had a bunch of stuff that I had written that could be put together. And I started playing around with the self-publishing opportunities that Amazon makes available through CreateSpace, which is a great website. And before I knew it, I had enough stuff gathered to put this out. I had originally written these things and put them together into these little pamphlet type dealies and handed them out to people I knew and sort of foisted them on them and said, here, read this and tell me what you think, read this. And, this is the first one. It's from Imposition, which is basically just a dialogue between 2 people. The first time I ever handed this to a student, he handed it back the next day and said, I tried to read it, but there's too much profanity. And so I said, so you didn't even because it's all about ideas. I wanted to explore some questions of philosophy and metaphysics. And he said the profanity just kept him from being able to engage with it at all. So when I revised it for this book, for reasons I'll get to in a second, I took profanity out, but I hope that also made it easier for people to access. This is the uncensored version, and it's one of the only copies available, so this is going to be worth a lot of money. Lost Track is one about garbage, and the chewing tobacco one, and music, and lots of other stuff. And then Agoraphobia is the most recent one, and a number of you have already read this. Deidre gave the great quote from the back. She said, as soon as I finished Agoraphobia, I wanted to read it again. And the hope is that it is that kind of story where you want to read it more than once, because there are a lot of things that I think will only become clear when you read it the second time. And maybe the third and fourth. So it's weird for me to read stuff from this to people, but apparently that's what you're supposed to do. I always feel like I have a captive audience when I'm in the classroom. I'm used to reading my stuff to the students, and then they nod off, or they have their cell phones out, or their eyes are wandering, because they're forced to be there, of course. And I really appreciate you coming here. I know you're not forced to be here, except for a social sense. Some of you, Diane doesn't have a choice, obviously. But it's my hope that it will be entertaining as well. So Imposition is the earliest one chronologically that I wrote, and it has to do with this picture, as you may have seen, of the connect the dots puzzle. And it appears to be a cross, but then when you look at the numbers, it becomes a spiral, and that gets into all the stuff about how you're told what to do and which dots to connect and why. Man, it's very deep. Anyway, it starts off, I started writing this, I think, in 1999 or somewhere around there, before I moved to Madison, certainly. And so I'll read a little bit from the beginning of this story, because it's basically just a discussion between 2 people. And if I had to do it again, I would have probably just made it a straight dialogue where it said who was talking, because at certain points people have told me that it gets a little confusing who's talking when, but whatever, you just deal with it. So at the beginning, one of the people is reading it's a he said, she said, and the guy is reading he's the first person narrator, he is reading a newspaper article, and this is based on a true article, which I can't reprint in the book because it's copyright of Associated Press, but whatever. So he says, 2 kids were shot to death in Littleton, Colorado, I said, the place where you, I assume, know the Columbine shooting took place. This was like a year after, 6 months or something after that. In a subway, the other person says, Littleton has a subway system? No, the restaurant. Oh, check this out, I read from the news report. I hope it was just a robbery, said one of Kunselman's co-workers. I've had more than enough of this. This stuff needs to stop, end quote. How bizarre is that, to be hoping that a friend of yours was killed because of a robbery? Well, if it's better than the alternative. That's so horrible, I said, and read some more. They listed all these things that have happened since the Columbine shootings. And then this guy who went to the scene of the killing to bring flowers said, every week there's something that happens here. This is supposed to be a normal community. Kim said, there's no such thing. I forgot I even gave her a name. Apparently her name is Kim. There's no such thing. What do you mean? Well, what is a normal community? Is it a perfect little suburb where soccer moms take their kids around in minivans and cheerful dads come home after a long day at the office and play with their kids and everyone grows up happy, respecting each other and loving everything? Please, that doesn't exist. It's a fairy tale. When the massacre first happened, she went on, what was the first thing out of the mouths of everyone there? She looked up at me. I blinked. What? How could this have happened here? She said with mock hysteria. This is such a nice community. What went wrong? Littleton is normal. This is a normal school. This isn't supposed to happen here. Which means, of course, that it's supposed to happen somewhere. The kids and parents are used to hearing about this sort of thing, but not where they live. Black and Latino kids have gang fights. We're used to hearing about that. But rich white kids aren't supposed to shoot each other. That's an abnormality. More fairy tales. It's as if we're saying the rationale and mindset behind the use of violence reaches some of our kids, but not others. Well, which is worse? To believe that this is intentional or not? Which is more horrifying? To say that we teach all kids that violence is okay, and some kids understand that we don't really mean it, and some don't? Or to say that our society purposely teaches some kids that violence is okay, so they take each other out, and shows other kids, the kids in the normal communities, that violence is not acceptable? Frankly, I don't know which scenario is more frightening. And it continues from there. I don't want to try to present my answers to those questions, because I have answers. Those of you who know me know that I am a very didactic person, and I have opinions about all of these things. But mostly what I want to do is just sort of explore the questions and where the concepts of violence come from. And I know that I'm not treading any new ground that hasn't been explored probably more effectively by philosophers and theorists like Hannah Arendt and Slavoj Žižek or whoever. But I think that part of the job of someone who is interested in philosophy is to approach these questions in ways that are new to them at least, and asking in an honest and open way for us to sort of look at how we live and why and where things come from and all that stuff. So that's imposition. Lost track is one that, okay, so in order for me to tell you about how I write, I need to tell you a little bit about how I teach. And one of the classes I teach is creative writing, which some of you I know have taken, and hopefully you found it to be worth your time. And every day on the board I put 2 journal topics up, and one of them is nonfiction and one of them is fiction. So the nonfiction one will often be what's your favorite movie and why, and the fiction one might be something like it was a dark and stormy night, or what have you. Well, one of the stories, actually 2 of the stories in the book come from the same fiction prompt, which is write a story about someone digging through the trash. And at the back of the book, there's a section called the Fiction Journal, which has 31 little stories that come out of that fiction writing time. I give them 10 minutes to write. Usually I'm writing at the same time. So anyway, it's about, so one of the ones in the back, the first one is called The Envelope, and it's about this guy who's digging through the trash and his roommate and lost his paycheck. The second time, so several years later, I had the same fiction topic up on the board, and I decided I wanted to write about it again. So I started writing about someone digging through the trash, and I wanted to go full gross. So I hope people haven't just eaten a full meal, but the people who didn't come explicitly to hear this, I'm sorry for intruding into your personal space. The very beginning of the story goes like this. My hand sank into something plastic and squishy. I made a grotesque face as I felt my fingers move around the thick, nasty whatever it was. I imagined a diaper filled with diarrhea or a grocery bag full of raccoon intestines. I wished I wasn't wearing my favorite green hoodie. Ooh, I said, then immediately closed my mouth and fought back some gut heaving. The stench of trash and vomit and garbage and filth and putrescence was everywhere. I could feel it seeping into my sneakers, winding through my hair, billowing into my hoodie. Serena was face down in the muck to my right. A swarm of flies droned around each of us, darting about as we sifted through the city's trash. Mounds of garbage surrounded us on every side. She spit again, a disgusting line of brown slobber flying from her lips. Are you chewing again? She shrugged. Just a little. It's keeping me focused. Another spit in my direction. Gross, I said. Aim that crap somewhere else. She goes on to throw up all over the place. And then the line that sort of the punchline to the intro is, it's funny what good music will do to you. And the reason they're digging through the trash in the city dump is because they have misplaced a CD that one of them just broke up with her boyfriend, and he had made them a mixed CD, and it included this song that they don't know the name of and they don't know who it was by, but it was a great song, so they need to find the disc. And so they're digging through the trash. They didn't realize they'd thrown it out. They're digging through the trash. They find it. It doesn't work, and so they're stuck now, being unable to find this song. Anyway, there is a part toward the end, because it's all about music and about impermanence and a lot of things. There's a quote, an epigraph in front of each story, of course, because I'm that pretentious. And so the epigraph in front of Lost Track says, it's from Confucius. He says, "To entire sincerity there belongs ceaselessness." So the part at the end, there's this song called Voodoo People. It's a remix of a Prodigy song done by the Chemical Brothers. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And they are the DJ, they're at this party, and the DJ keeps dropping in the beginning of this song and keeps sort of teasing them into thinking they're going to be playing it. And the one girl's very excited, the first person narrator. So she's very excited, and so this part, I wanted to sort of capture what it's like when you're at a party and you're having a really good time, but you really want to hear a certain song, and you want to hear a song that you know and love, and then it finally appears, and so then and don't forget, they're looking for this other song as well. That will be important in a second. So we made it back to the party and felt the music wrap itself back around us. He's going to play it soon, I said. He kicked a cup. We need to figure out what you're going to say to your DJ crush. She stopped walking and gave me a look. Oh, come on, I said. That was pretty good. She has a crush on the DJ, and there's also a DJ named DJ Crush. It's a hilarious double entendre. She reached in her mouth and pulled out the slimy glob of tobacco and flung it toward me. I stepped out of the way just as voodoo people came on for real. I dropped my cup and water spilled everywhere, and I jogged to the floor in between the stupid people who didn't realize what they were hearing. And then there was nothing but me and the tinny beat and the whirling synths, and that bass line swarmed in, and then the drums started pounding, and it was everything. And I was lost in the oblivion of the beat, and I kept moving and feeling it, and it was awesome. And 3 minutes later, I looked up, and there was Serena, just as lost as me. And I almost cried because it was such a perfect moment, and we kept dancing and smiling. And then something else came into the song that I didn't recognize, and I stopped moving because I realized that I did recognize it. And then I actually did start crying a little bit because Serena stopped, and she looked at me too, and her eyes widened, and I knew that she knew. And then she turned and walked straight for the DJ, and I followed her. She didn't exactly elbow a Snooki out of the way, but the girl gave her a look like she had. They're referring to the other girls around the DJ as Snookies because he couldn't possibly be interested in them because they're not deep like they are. Serena saw a notepad where the DJ had scrawled a bunch of track names and time. She moved toward it and he yelled, "Hey!" And she made a writing motion and he shrugged a little and nodded toward it. She turned a page and took his pen and wrote, "Please give me the name of this song." Then she showed it to him. He put the headphones into his shoulder and took the pen and wrote, "It's got a crazy long title." She took the pad back and wrote, "I know, this is really important," underlined really. "Can I wait and see the record?" He smiled when she showed him and then he wrote, "Yeah, or give me your email and I'll send it to you." "I won't laugh, I won't laugh, I won't laugh." She smiled and tried to ignore me and said, "Yeah," but he didn't hear her, but I did. She wrote her email address down and then tore it off and handed it to him. He nodded with a little smile of his own and took out his wallet and put her address in it. She turned and pulled the can of chew out of her pocket and handed it to me. I raised an eyebrow and she nodded. Finally. She's trying to get her to stop chewing tobacco. We waited until the song ended and she turned to a new page of the pad and he pulled the disc off the turntable and showed the label to her. She scribbled furiously and smiled at him. "Thanks," she yelled as the new song came to life. "You don't trust me?" he yelled. She shrugged. "Stuff happens," she yelled. "I can't take any more chances with this track." She hesitated and folded the paper and handed it to me. "How about this?" she yelled to him. "How about this?" she yelled to him as I put it in my pocket. "If I don't hear from you, I can get it from her." He nodded and we turned to go. Then I stopped and stepped to him. "Thanks for the crystal method," I yelled. He smiled and nodded, then turned back to the music. Yeah, so that's Lost Track. I don't know exactly how many of these I'm supposed to read. How long do these things go? I have till 8. Allow me to read from page 1. No.
I think it's a 52-minute class.
Exactly. I had to keep that attention span kept. All right, yeah. So there's a couple other ones, and then I'll read some of the shorter ones from the back. KR Services is one that I had forgotten that I wrote. I was we're looking through some old files to see, if there's anything that I wanted to pull from back in the day, and the answer to that was a no. Most of the stuff I had written earlier was really bad, but I had forgotten I wrote this one, and so I came up with this story, KR Services LLC. It is a reference to Blackwater. Are you familiar with the private contracting military firm Blackwater? They changed their name recently to XE Services, and so I'm pretty sure this is Krypton or Kryptonite or something. So it's a very clever reference. Again, I gotta hold my book up right. The epigraph comes from a CIA manual that was produced around 1954, and it says, "No assassination instruction should ever be written or recorded. Ideally, only one person will be involved. Assassinations can seldom be employed with a clear conscience. Persons who are morally squeamish should not attempt it." And it is about assassinations, because I saw the movie Wanted. Anybody see that movie? Angelina Jolie and I can't remember the name of it. Morgan Freeman's in it, unfortunately. It's about this magical handgun cult, and they're assassinating people, or kill one, save 100. That's their whole motto, and it's this deep thing about it wants to be Fight Club, and then it doesn't know if it wants to be The Matrix. And, it's a bad movie, and the reason it's bad is because the question is, how do you know which one you're killing or save which 100, right? So I wrote this story as a way to sort of, interrogate that question. And yeah, so I'll read a part. I'll read the part at the beginning because I think it's more germane to the discussion. No, I will read the part that I highlighted. Sorry. He gets, so this guy named Tyrone Woodburn is sort of recruited into this organization, KR Services LLC. And then he gets promoted to this group called Wadjet Squad, which is a very secret, elite group of basically assassins. And he shows up for his first meeting with this squad, and he's somewhat surprised by who he meets. Tyrone hesitated at the door. He could hear voices out on the roof. It was a kid, one of them said. It was a dog, another replied. It doesn't even matter, the first said. The guy wasn't even kited. His voice got more urgent. 4 weeks we were there and we saw nothing. No contact, no activity. Tyrone almost jumped when he heard a woman's voice cut in. Hey, she said, cutting the first guy off. Footsteps. For the last time, shut the... Tyrone threw the door open and shielded his eyes from the sun. Don't worry, there is no cursing in this book, so you don't have to worry about the children. And we'll talk about the one that blacked out in a second. Tyrone threw the door open and shielded his eyes from the sun. The woman was standing inches away from the guy, her finger in his face. 4 soldiers in standard KR kit, M4s all around, 2 stun grenades each. The woman snapped her gaze at Tyrone. Her short dark hair flipped slightly. Woodburn, she said, and scowled at the other guy who stepped back. You're late. Tyrone frowned and checked his watch. No, I'm not, he said. You're all early. She smiled just a little. In Wadjet Squad, she said, walking toward him, you're early or you're dead. She offered her hand. I'm Phillips. She pointed to the other 3, ending with the guy she had been chastising. Jenkins, Delaney, Maxwell. Tyrone nodded and looked nervously at Phillips. I didn't realize. She pulled a knife from her belt and held it to Tyrone's throat. Say it, she said, low and tense. Say something about chromosomes. Eyes wide, Tyrone looked at the guys who were making cautionary pantomimes of do not do that. Please, she said, say something about averages and dimorphism. He stared at her and she stared back. Please, she said again, pushing the blade in just a little. I haven't killed anything in 4 days. He waited and eventually she pulled the knife away. Okay then, she said. As she turned around, Tyrone whipped his rifle up and put it to her temple. Don't ever do that again, he said. She smiled and faced him. There's only one reason I ever would, she said. You don't say it and I won't do it. There was a pause. Deal? He glanced at the other guys who watched amused. He nodded and lowered his weapon. Deal. All right then, she said. Let's get to work. So dimorphism, for those of you who don't know, that's often what's brought up, the imbalances in terms of biology between male and female. And as always, I worry that maybe what's going on isn't really clear there. He's starting to say, I didn't realize women could do this work, and she's, why not? Why couldn't we? Whatever. All right. So the other one, so the reason this one's blacked out, there's a whole lot of curse words in this story. It's called Respawn. It's about 15-year-olds playing video games online. You can't tell that story without curse words. So, whereas in another story I might say he cursed and spat into the dirt or whatever, in this one you have to have the bad words in the story, but because I'm a teacher, I don't want to be seen publishing filth with a lot of bad words in it, so I try to reach a compromise that would call attention to the fact that there are some words that are totally not allowed to be said in print, but then part of the story is there are other words that are allowed, and why is it we allow some words and not others, and et cetera, et cetera. But the only other of the big stories I want to read from is the one called, well, it's called This Letter, and in the United States we say Z, but in the UK they say Z, and if you turn it 90 degrees it's an N, so it's again very deep about how we look at things and all that. I wanted to write a love story because I don't read a lot of love stories, and I think part of the reason I don't read a lot of love stories is because I think a lot of them are poorly done. I think there's a lot of claptrap that gets produced under the guise of love stories, but I know that a lot of my students, especially female students, tend to like love stories. And so I thought, okay, could I tell a story that is heartfelt, honest, authentic, and not sentimental and sappy and silly? And so this is what I gave it, and not surprisingly, I drew a lot from my own life because I think that I have managed to find a form of love that is really long-lasting and authentic and awesome and magnificent. So when Diane was reading it, she said it's very weird to be reading a story where you're sort of one of the characters. And there's sort of equal parts stuff drawn from our lives and stuff that's made up, fictional. The woman in the story, for instance, is an Indian woman from Britain, so she's a little different from Diane in that regard. And the story also focuses on this character called The Little Hater. It's the voice in the guy's head that's constantly chastising him with everything he's doing wrong. And I have to admit that I got that, or I should give respect to Jay Smooth, who is a video blogger on a site called illdoctrine.com. And he's a great site. He has a lot of really good things to say. The best video he ever did, I think, is called How to Tell Someone They Sound Racist, because it's about focusing on what people say, not who they are. Because so often in the media, discourse, and politics, people get caught up in, how can you say that about this person, and blah, blah, blah. I just want to talk about what the person said or did. It's not about their soul, right? So anyway, he talks in another video about this little hater that's in our heads, especially when we're trying to do something creative. And it tells us we're bad, and it tells us that we're nothing, and it tells us that we're silly. So when talking about love, I think it's necessary, certainly from my experience, the little hater is always a very active participant in those deliberations. So they have eaten at Ventian Palace, if y'all know that restaurant. It's a great restaurant down on State Street. I guess it's not off State Street, whatever. Yeah, so then they go to the Union Terrace, basically. It's one of the first stories I ever said in Madison, too, which was unusual to be writing about Madison in a way that was supposed to be kind of celebratory. I mean, I love this city, so whatever. So they go to sit down, and they start talking about movies. The last vestiges of sunlight were evaporating, and we found a quiet spot on the far side of the pier. The little hater tried to intervene, but I was enjoying myself too much to notice. Much. Enjoy it while it lasts, schmuck, he said. I give you a week at the most. You're already getting tired and it's only 8. What are you even going to talk about? You're not interesting enough to keep this going. Just give it up now and save yourself the trouble. You could go home and watch Futurama or something. She sat down, dangling her legs over the edge. Her shoes skimmed the water, sending little ripples outward. I watched them until they vanished into the darkness. I won't attempt a British accent, partially because some of the people who asked me to film this are friends of mine in the UK, and I think they would probably make fun of me if I tried to do the British accent. Okay, she said, movies. And that's one of the things that really attracts him to her, is that she has this beguiling accent. Whatever. Okay, she said, movies. Excuse me. I beg your pardon. Oh, I beg your pardon. Okay, movies. Yeah, I said, I watched a few movies in my time. Like Star Wars, I saw that one. I leaned back with a pompous pose. I'm pretty smart when it comes to movies. All right, she said, top 5 movies. Oh my goodness. I'm very sorry. Thank you for bearing with me. There's so much pressure. Top 5 movies. Okay. Ooh, I said, sitting up. Okay. Blue Velvet is up there because David Lynch is just the man. I thought you said the man was crushing you. Not the man like the man, but you know, he's the man. You are not making a lick of sense. Whatever. Spinal Tap has to be on the list. She gestured to her shirt and altered her accent a bit. This is my exact skeletal structure. I shivered in a rush of eternity as the stunning ecstasy of the moment washed over me. Without prompting, she was spitting dialogue at me. I recovered and said, well, but it's not green. She pointed with those elegant fingers and smiled. It is green, she said. I leaped on her and kissed her with passion and relief. It was euphoric and blissful and amazing. Of course I didn't, but I did nod and grin. And I looked at her for a little too long because she looked at me too. But then she looked away and said a little too loudly, number 3. I gazed into the water. Yeah, I saw this new movie last month called Primer. It's really weird and really confusing, but it's really good. What's it about? I paused. I'm not really sure, I said. There's these 2 guys and they make a box or something and then it lets them go back in time. She made a face mixing intrigue and skepticism. But they can only go back to when they start the machine up, so like 6 hours or whatever. Sounds odd. It is, it's really weird. I like time travel stories. Have you read The Time Traveler's Wife? No, I said, but this is the best time travel movie I've ever seen. You should definitely see it. Maybe you can tell me what's going on. She shrugged. You have it on DVD. Are you doing anything tomorrow? Yeah, I'm watching Primer. You should come to the co-op in the afternoon. Some of my housemates will watch it too. The little hater started in again. She doesn't want to be alone with you. She wants to have an out if you start getting weird. She probably won't like it, and her housemates won't like it either, and you'll look really stupid. Why don't you pick a different movie? Yeah, I said, all right. All right then, she said, 4. 4 o'clock? Sure, she chuckled. 4 o'clock is fine, but I meant number 4 on your list. And so on. Yeah, and then the first one's agoraphobia. I'm not going to say anything about it other than it's awesome, and it's about someone in prison and people talking very quietly. That's all I'll say about it, and it bears reading more than once. All right, let me read a couple things from the back, and then we'll wrap this up. I really appreciate you coming out for, I know it's Friday night, and there's probably a lot of other things that are even more exciting than sitting here listening to me read. The Killer Mutant Survival Guide. I had a student who insisted that he would never read a book after school ever in his life. And he's so proud of this. He was defiant and insistent, never, man. And I'm reading Christopher Hedges. He wrote a book called Empire of Illusion, and he has a lot of these really sad statistics about like 45% of people who graduate from high school never read a book again in their lives, and then like 30% of people who graduate from college never read a book again. And it's really sad to hear that sort of thing. And I think that there, presumably you all know why it's important to read, but I try to tell the students, like, reading is important, and I think it's fun, but even if you don't think it's fun, it's so important. There's some information you can't get any other way. And unfortunately, I really do think that this scenario is what it would come down to for some students. Dude, why bother? Books are so boring, Tom said. Agent Stern blinked, still holding out the Killer Mutant Survival Guide. Sir, he said, trust me, you're going to want to read this. He thrust it toward Tom again. Tom took it and frowned at the plain beige cover. This looks stupid, he said, and flipped through it. Where are the pictures? I like books with pictures. Agent Stern sighed. Sir, he said, I really don't have time for this. There is a horde of deadly, vicious killer mutants on their way into the city. He pointed to the survival guide and shifted the weight of the huge sack on his shoulder. This book will give you essential information to help you avoid them and stay alive. If you don't want to have your eyeballs chewed out and get strangled with your own intestines by radioactive demon creatures, then read this book. Tom let out a pained groan. Oh man, he cried, 300 pages. He shook his head. Isn't there an audio book? Did they make a movie about it? No! There's no movie, there's no audio book. Read this book if you want to live through the end of the week. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got 500 more books to distribute today. He stormed off to the next house. Tom made a face and tossed the book toward the garbage can. Whatever, he said. I'm not reading no stupid 300-page book. He flipped the channel past the news. Rampaging monsters have been sighted on the outskirts of... Boring, Tom said, and turned it to the football game. The end. I don't really like being like preachy, but yeah, I do. But I don't want to... I find that, again, the satire thing tends to work a little better than saying, like, you're wrong, you're stupid if you don't read. Whatever. There are a great many books that have no pictures in. Isn't that the line from Alice in Wonderland when she's talking about whatever? All right, the weekly arm. This one's just kind of weird, but it actually comes from, so I tell my writing students all the time, one of the best ways to come up with ideas for stories is to keep your ears open and to hear people say things that you can't explain, and then you have to come up with a story off of it. Lewis Black, the stand-up comedian, had a great bit about when he was at International House of Pancakes, I think, or somewhere. And he heard someone say, if it weren't for my pony, I never would have spent that year in college. And he said, it takes a minute for your brain to figure out, what the hell are you talking about? You turn around and they're gone. And then you're left thinking, well, maybe it was a pony scholarship. I was walking to class in the University of Florida in Gainesville, where I'm from originally, go Gators. And there was this guy and this girl going the other direction, and as they passed, he said to her, now I have to go home and wash my arm. And it took me about a block to realize that, wait a minute, what the heck? Now, this comes from a line that I heard actually from a student say to another student in the hallway. And one day, again, didn't stick around long enough to figure out why they said it, but she said to him, to people walking down the hallway, did you read his arm yesterday? And I have no idea why they said that, but it became this story. Did you read his arm yesterday? Kelly asked. I sat up at my desk. No, what was the headline? Gustav's arm-based newspaper, The Weekly Arm, was my main source of news. I never missed an issue. Kelly gave that little smug smirk of hers. You'll just have to read it yourself. Oh, come on, I said. Just tell me. Why don't you get a subscription, she asked. For $20 a month, Gustav would find you on the day of publication and roll up his sleeve. I can't afford that, I said. Come on, Kelly, just tell me. She smirked and shook her head. Her plastic earrings flopped around. Sorry, Fred, no dice, but it's a really good story. I grimaced. Oh, I said, now I've got to know. She giggled. Ha ha, I know, and you don't. I thought for a moment, tapping my pencil. An idea struck, and I raised my hand. Mrs. Yechtenbach, I said, can I go to the bathroom? Mrs. Yechtenbach peered at me. Have you finished your translation, Fred? I looked at my paper. This is ridiculous. How do you expect us to translate all 2,200 pages of Proust's A la recherche de temps perdu in one class period? I threw down my pencil. I don't even speak French. Yeah, Kelly added, why are we doing this in gym class anyway? Do 2 more pages and you can go, Mrs. Y said. I grumbled and tried another sentence. It was no use. The whole page was just jumbled letters. Kelly leaned over. You're going to die when you read his arm. It is such a cool story. Stop, I said. You're going to make me crazy. It's out of this world, she said. Your jaw will literally drop. Ah, I cried, jumping up and running from the room. Mrs. Y gave chase, both of us stampeding through the hallway. I dashed toward the math rooms. 3rd hour, I thought. He's in geometry class. With Mrs. Y in hot pursuit, followed by 2 security officers and an assistant principal, I blasted through the doors of room 220. I spotted Gustav near the window, putting the final touches on a chocolate cake. I leaped and tackled him to the ground, sending chocolate icing and egg whites flying. What is the meaning of this? Mr. Kemlyoff shouted. The guards and Mrs. Yechtenbach raced in, but I ignored them and pinned Gustav to the floor. I've got to know, I shouted. Let me read your arm. You didn't pay, Gustav cried. Let go of me. No, I yelled. Let me see. I managed to grab his sleeve and yanked it up. I seized his arm and held it still long enough to read the headline. Kelly drives Fred crazy with misleading info about this week's news. 15-year-old student faces suspension for insubordination, attacking another student, and disrupting geometry class. I started to cry. Room 220, by the way, some people know that was my room in the old high schools. I had to work. And most of the time, I think if you find numbers or codes and stuff in movies and books, probably there's a story behind it. And one of the reasons I like watching DVD commentaries, they'll be like, oh, that license plate is my grandmother's birthday. All right, 2 more here real quick. Tapioca Canyon is on 219, so let me read that one to you. And this is one I think I just came up with because I just came up with the idea. The first line was just something I put on the board one day, and I said, here, see what you can do with this, kids. The Grand Canyon was filled with tapioca pudding. I walked to the edge, not with the trepidation I had had the day before when there had been no pudding, but only a terrifying precipice. I gazed down into the river of beige dessert food and then at my wife. Look, Sharon, I said, the Grand Canyon is filled with tapioca pudding. She gave me an annoyed look. I can see that, she said. Where did it come from? I shrugged. We heard the zipper of the tent open and our son Malcolm emerged, yawning. Look, Malcolm, I said, the Grand Canyon is filled with tapioca pudding. He ran to join us. Wow, he said. Can I go swimming, Mom? I don't know, she said, and looked from the canyon to me. Do you think it's safe? I shrugged. All I know is the Grand Canyon is filled with tapioca pudding. Sharon sighed. I guess it can't hurt, she said. As Malcolm ran to change into his swimsuit, a National Park Service truck pulled up. A tall man in a brown uniform stepped out. What's all this then? He asked. I pointed into the goop. The Grand Canyon is filled with tapioca pudding, I said. Sharon scowled at me. You just like saying that. I grinned. Well, what should I say? You must admit it's an amusing sentence. And after all, the Grand Canyon is filled with tapioca pudding. It's a sentence you certainly don't hear every day, she said. But imagine if you did, Park Ranger said. The next morning, the local page of the New York Times read, Aliens invade Europe, Paris destroyed, millions dead. The end. All right. One more here, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. I can't imagine anybody having any actual Q's, but if you do, I've got A's. And I only give 3 each semester. The family was stunned. So the journal topic, I think this came from, there's a book called Writer's Book of Matches, which has a whole lot of just story ideas and prompts and stuff. If you're interested in writing, I encourage you to check that book out. I might get in trouble because I'm reprinting a lot of their prompts, but whatever. So the prompt was, Gloria's grandmother decided to go skydiving. So, the family was stunned. Grandpa gave us his patented "don't look at me" face, just like when Grandma had announced her plan to learn C++, and then later, the next year, when she had declared her plan to become the next Steve Irwin. My mother was passing me the mashed potatoes. My dad set the cranberry sauce down and sighed. Mom, he said patiently, come on, this is not a good idea. What about your arthritis? Grandma took a swig of her malt liquor and gave up. That's nothing but some BS limitation Dr. Jablorski's trying to slap on me. Can't hold me back. She raised her right hand and bent her middle and ring fingers inward. 1 year ago, at the previous Thanksgiving, she had explained this as throwing her set up, but so far as we could tell, this was something she had developed with her bridge club, and the only gang activity she was involved in was playing trump cards while hollering, yeah, what? Talk some smack now, punk! You could get hurt, Mother Kendra, my mom said, but Grandma waved a derisive hand. So what? She said, and pulled her fitted baseball cap down. You could get hurt driving 90 miles an hour in a school zone, but I still do it. My 5-year-old brother Isaiah had a dazed smile and wide eyes. I think skydiving sounds cool, he said. Yeah, huh? Grandma said loudly and took out her earbud. Hey, you want to come? No way, my dad said. You are not taking your 5-year-old grandson to go skydiving. Grandma glared at him and shook her head slowly. You are such a hater. Dad rolled his eyes. We ate in silence for several minutes. Then a low booming noise was not so much heard as felt. We recognized the heavy distorted bass notes a full minute before the noise of the hydraulics on a '63 Cadillac began to flex and pound. Oh, Grandma said, jumping up. Estelle's here. She gave Grandpa a kiss on the cheek and tore the last remaining leg off the turkey. We're bouncing out of that new club uptown, she said, gnawing on the poultry meat. So long, suckers! She slammed the door behind her and the car squealed off into the night. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes. The young man in the front.
The young man.
Let me guess, you have two things real quick.
Just a couple things.
Yeah.
I do, just a couple. Number one, put you on the spot.
Yes.
The two statistics you gave, 45%, 30%.
That may be wrong. You should
Oh, well,
read
that's
it.
fine, that's fine. And this is putting you on the spot. Why?
Why do kids not read much after school? Well, Chris Hedges says that it's because the system of education is largely designed to do what's called training rather than actual education. And I think that a lot of kids see it. You know, I tell my students to make the split between truth and money. And we can't survive without a little of both. You can't live without money. You have to pay the bills. But you can't live without truth either. And I think that so many kids focus on school as just a numbers game. They have to get the grade, they have to get the points, they have to get the numbers. And then when they get done with college, when they get done with high school, whatever it is, they're done. That's it. And they don't have to do it. They see reading as something they have to do. And unfortunately, they don't know about awesome books like this one, which are actually worth your time. And they haven't found, I tell them, if you don't like to read, you just haven't found the right books yet. Keep looking, you'll find them. And I have had students who, you know, I'll give them, like Donald Goines is one that anybody ever read Donald Goines? He's a really good writer. Wrote a lot about, you know, street hustlers and you know, people sort of on the underside of society that Nelson Albert talks a lot about. And so when I gave one student last semester, I gave him Donald Goines and he was just blown away. He was like, I've never read a book and felt like it was really important. So I think that in a lot of cases, they just haven't found the right books. I tell them keep looking. Any other question? Yes.
So that kid you were talking about who said, I'm never going to read another book. Did he ever find a book they read?
Not that I know of. Unfortunately, I tend not to hear from the students who hate my class and go figure. But I do hear from students who say, you know, like, you know, that book that we read in the class, you know, Things They Cared or whatever it is. I really like that book, and, you know, I read another book by him or something like that. So, you know, teaching, I think, and this is going to be my next book, is going to be reflections about teaching. There's 6 parts of my life that I've already started working on this. This is going to be awesome. You're going to want to put in your pre-orders now. So there's 6 parts of my life. There's teaching, there's writing, there's being a political activist, feminist, anarchist, whatever. There's video games, there's Zen Buddhism, and there's hip-hop music. So they often fit at weird angles into each other. And I don't remember why I started talking about that, but so yeah, teaching is it's an act of faith in a lot of ways. You have to believe that what you're doing is meaningful and that you can plant seeds that will germinate 20 years from now. And again, usually you don't hear from the people who do experience the flowers blooming in their garden because of what you planted. But sometimes you do. And if anybody's in teaching and they're feeling frustrated, just hang on. You're going to get a note from a kid. And usually it's the one you think is not paying attention, and they'll write you a note and say the most nice, kind things, and it'll blow you away, and you'll start to get something in your eye. That's what makes it fun. Any other questions? Yes?
Would you honor us with, I'm always curious where writers get their names. And your stories have a lot of names.
Yes, they do have a lot of names.
And you have a favorite one.
Mrs. Yechtenbach.
Yes.
That came out, I don't remember where it came from originally. I used it in a story, and I think it was the Chang Had a Good Day. Did you read that one?
No.
A lot of bad things happen to this guy. The story, it starts out in a line of dialogue, says, okay, Chang said, no matter what happens, I'm going to have a good day today. And every kid writes the same story, which is monsters attack him, and a bear eats his face, and, you know, all sorts of horrible things happen. And that's exactly the same story I wrote. So his teacher, I believe that was the first time I used the name Mrs. Yechtenbach, and the kids think it's amusing, and then I keep using it, and I've stopped telling them that watch for it later, and then I wait to see how many times it shows up before they notice and ask, like, what's with that name? So yeah, I don't think it has like a specific. In the story ZZN, the woman's name is Vandana. Anybody besides Diane know Vandana? Why is the name Vandana? Vandana Shiva is a really cool activist. How would you describe her? She's an activist for seed saving, and she's from India. She's really cool. Anyway, yeah. And then I don't know. Oh yeah, and then the guy in that story is named Mitch. And those of you who like stand-up comedy probably are familiar with the name Mitch, because there's a great stand-up guy named Mitch Hedberg. And if you haven't listened to Mitch Hedberg, you should definitely check him out. He's got 3 albums because he died really young, but they're awesome albums. And they're very, if you like Stephen Wright and early George Carlin kind of playing with words and stuff, that's Mitch Hedberg. And he's, yeah, died too soon. Anyway, any other questions? All right, well, thank you all very much for coming. I hope you had a good time. Oh, food, yes, please eat food. We got food. There's delicious hummus from People's Bakery and cherry tomatoes from the Troy farm where Diane works. So help yourself to some food, and I guess I'll sign some books.
And yeah, the book's and we have a table set up with
Oh,
the chairs
great.
next to the, across from the counter.
Excellent. Thank you so